Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about job interviews. So the best way to prepare for an interview is to do some practice. It would be great to sit down and have somebody ask you some questions. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, a brother, sister, a friend, and just pretend you're in that situation. What exactly would you say? How would you answer questions? And then let them give you some feedback. Did you fidget with something? Did you have bad posture, or did your answers not make sense? Whatever it might be that you can improve on before you actually go to the interview. If you don't have anybody to practice with, or maybe you just don't want to practice with somebody, you could just come up with a list of questions. I'm going to be giving you a list of common questions that are asked during interviews, and just practice them. What exactly would you say if they asked those questions during an interview? Research the company, find out about the company, what they sell, awards they have, as much information as you can. Most companies are very impressed by people who've done their homework and know a little bit about the company before they come in. They know that they have that interest if they've spent the time and they've researched. It also can help you when you answer questions like, why do you want this job? You can incorporate some of that research into the answer. Bring extra copies of your resume. It makes you look very prepared if you get there and for some reason they can't find your resume, or there's several people doing the interview and then you have a copy for everyone. At the start of the interview time, make sure you're there early. You don't want to be running in late. It will send the message that you'll probably be late to work. They usually recommend about 10 minutes before the interview is when you actually walk into the office. I would say you could be in the parking lot half an hour early. Give yourself some time to breathe, maybe think, relax before you go in. You know that you're there and you're not stuck on a train or in traffic, so give yourself plenty of time. And then you don't want to be in the office too early where you're staring at the secretary, maybe making it a little bit awkward. Business greeting, usually it starts with a handshake, and so make sure you have a nice firm handshake. You don't want to squeeze their hand so hard it feels like you're going to break their hand. You also don't want to be that dead limp fish that barely touches them. As they set up the interview, you want to let them offer you a seat, kind of letting you know where they want you to sit for the best arrangement, especially if there is a panel interview with multiple people coming in the room. They're going to ask you a lot of questions, obviously, and a lot of things are trying to be determined by those questions. One, can you actually meet their needs? Can you do the job? There's no point in hiring you if you can't. So do you have the education and the training? They also want to know why you want the job. What exactly is it something you're just very passionate about or interested in? Or are you looking more at the benefits of that job for you? They're looking to see, will you personality-wise fit in with their employees. They don't want to bring drama into the workplace, so they need to find somebody who will work well with the current employees that they have. And then they just may ask questions just to clarify things that you put on your resume. If there's gaps or red flags, or maybe they just want more information. A lot of times your resume is going to be the starting point of where they start asking questions. As you answer them, now you don't want to give an answer that's too short, that's not giving them enough information. But you also don't want to go on and on and on and tell them your life story for one question. So an average time that they recommend, and this would be something that you figure out more in practice. It's not like you're sitting there in the interview staring at your clock or the watch on your arm trying to make sure that you have the right time frame. But the general idea is no shorter than 20 seconds. You don't want one or two word answers that aren't going to give them a lot of information. You want to give them an answer and then maybe an example or an explanation or a story to go along with that. But you also don't want to give them too much that you're going on and on for half an hour. So it should be no longer than 2 minutes. So again, that would be something to practice. Make sure you're answering the question that was asked as best as you can. Sometimes if you're not answering it the way what they're looking for, they'll reword it for you. But if you're continually avoiding the question, that's going to send some red flags as to why you don't want to answer that question. Never just give a yes or no unless they tell you specifically. That's all you can give. I was in an interview once that they actually said, tell me your gut feeling, yes or no, for the answers, and then we move on. You can't explain, you can't give anything else. But it was a screening interview, so they were looking to see if my answers met what they were looking for. Most cases, though, you have plenty of opportunity and they want you to explain. If you're sitting there just answering yes or no, it almost feels like they're grilling you, and it can be much more nerve-wracking. When you can, use specific examples. If you've been in that situation, tell about it, what you learned from it, what happened, as much information as you can so they can get a picture of what you're talking about. And if you can, link your experience to the job. This is my experience and this is how it would help me if I were hired. Be honest. Usually if you're not honest, it's going to stand out. They'll pick up on that at some point, or later on if they find out you were lying, they can fire you if they did hire you. But you don't need to offer negative information. If you come in at the very beginning and I told you, or I came in and said, hey, I've been fired from my last 3 jobs, I'm just not a morning person and I never get up early, so just to let you know. Yeah, it's honest and straightforward, but personally I would be not wanting to hire me if I came in with that kind of negative information right away. Now, if they ask you specifically, you do have to answer with correct information. Maybe you try to make it a little more positive of how you're learning about it, working on it, whatever. Alright, so it may sound kind of strange, but you actually are kind of selling yourself as a potential employee. You want to advertise yourself as the best person for that job. And some ways to do that is making it more of a conversation, that you are sitting there just kind of talking with them back and forth. The most comfortable interview I've ever been in was actually an interview where it was more of a conversation. We had something in common, and it was like you were sitting down talking to somebody you knew, not in an interview. The interview seemed like it was really short. It went really well, and so that can be a benefit, especially for your nerves, if you can make that conversation just flow. For weaknesses, very popular question is, tell me, what are your weaknesses? And a lot of people, when they are trying to get a job and impress somebody, they don't want to talk about that. But the best way to answer that is give your weaknesses and then turn it into something positive. So how you're working on it, how you're making it better, so that it's not so much of a weakness. I've also seen some people approach this question as kind of flipping it, that something like, I'm a perfectionist, and so in order for me to get a job done, I want to make sure it's done and done right, so it might take me a little bit longer. Well, that's good for the employer because they know your job's going to get done well. But for you, maybe not so good because you're going to take extra time to do that. The question, tell me about yourself, is really, you want information that's job related. What are your accomplishments, your skills, your abilities, your education, your experience that would help you on the job? You want to show the skills and how they can be used on the job. So relate it to, if you hired me, here's the skills I have, and here's how it would help if you hired me. It is okay to tell them that you want the job. It doesn't look desperate. It just shows that you're very enthusiastic and very interested in that job. And so a lot of employers know that if you're very interested and you're very enthusiastic, you're probably going to do a better job if they hire you than that person who maybe isn't quite as excited about the possibility. Okay. At the end of the interview, a lot of times they'll ask if you have any questions. You should have something to ask. And that could be something about a typical day, what the coworkers would be like. It could be something specific about the company, but ask something. It shows that you're interested. What you shouldn't ask about, though, is salary or benefits. First interviews, a lot of times that's not something that's discussed. Usually it's in that interview before they make a decision. They tend to bring that up because they know that's something that you need to know, and try to let them bring that up. If you ask too early, it shows or will send a message that you're more interested in the benefits you would get than the actual job. All right, so at the end of the interview, you want that final kind of sales pitch. Why are you the best person for the job? What are those lasting thoughts that you want them to remember? You also want to find out the next step in the interview process, because for nerve-wise, it's nice to know that when to expect a call or when they're going to be making a decision. It's also good to ask because then you're showing interest in wanting to go to that next step in the process. Offer references, so that would be good to bring your reference sheet. So if they're interested, they have all that contact information right there and they can talk to someone about why you would be the best person for that job. Ask them for a business card. That gives you all of their contact information, the correct spelling of their name, and then once you get home, you should use that information to write a thank you letter. And just be polite. Thank them for their time, for their consideration. Sometimes just being polite can set you apart, and that's, I think, an easy way to get an edge maybe on other people if they're not as polite. Okay, after the interview, you go home, the interview is done. One thing you should do is just jot down some notes, things you want to remember. Maybe there's questions they asked that you had no idea how to answer. So if you have another interview, you might want to practice that. Maybe there's things about the company that you want to remember. Sometimes that can be really important if you're going through multiple interviews, just to be able to keep straight which company is which. When I was in college, I went to a job fair and I interviewed with 8 different schools all in the same day. Between each one, I did write down some notes. Otherwise, by the end of the day, all 8 schools would just kind of mesh together. It would be hard to remember which was which. Sometimes just general impressions are good to jot down. Within 24 hours, you should send a thank you letter. There are some big companies, and usually they're the bigger competitive companies, but they have a checklist of all the things they want to see from their potential employees. And sometimes a thank you letter's on that. So you want to make sure that you send that. It also helps get your name in there one more time, hopefully about the time they're making a decision of who they're going to hire or who they're bringing to the next step. If you're not interested in the job, it's okay to let them know at this point. Maybe it just really wasn't what you thought it was, or maybe you just don't feel like that's the type of company that you would want to work for, or whatever the reasons might be. Or maybe you get home and you had a job offer from the company you really wanted to work for anyways. You can be honest, but I would caution you that if that would be the only job you'd be offered, would you take it? So you don't want to burn bridges if there's nothing else concrete anyways that you could have. All right, next part of the video, we're going to talk about the types of interviews that are out there. And typically when you think of a job interview, you think of you sitting down with the manager and then asking questions. And that's very typical. That's the traditional one-on-one interview. It's the most common type. It tends to be where you're talking to the person who would most likely be your direct manager. And sometimes that's you work with or have interviews with several different managers at different times so that they can all get an idea of who would be the best candidate. Sometimes you'll have a panel interview, and panel interviews usually are somewhere between 2 and 8 people from the company. And that could be human resources, it could be managers, it could be all kinds of people from the company. From the company's perspective, it gets multiple opinions about the job all in one spot, one interview. For you, it might be a little more nerve-wracking, maybe a little more butterflies because you have multiple sets of eyes staring at you. So like I said, collective opinion, and they can all be asking different questions and coming up with different things. And then once they're done with the interview process, they can debate and decide who they think is the best person for the job. All right, the next one is kind of it can be a one-on-one interview, it can be a panel interview, but basically this is more of how they're asking questions. Mostly with a behavioral interview, they're asking situational questions. What would you do in this situation? And they're really looking for things that you've done in the past, because it's based on the logic that what you've done in the past predicts how you would act in the future if that happened on this new job. Typically, they say to answer these questions with the STAR technique, which stands for situation. So you're setting the scene, what exactly happened, the task that you had to do, and then you explain what you actually did, that action. What was your response, and how did you handle the situation? And then the result. Would you do the same thing again? What did you learn from it? What could you have done better? Or did you think it went really well? And that paints that whole picture of how the interview went, and gives them more information. A group interview is a little different. A lot of times this is for a company where there are a lot of candidates applying for the same job. It's a screening interview, so they're going to bring everybody who's applying for the job in at once. And then they'll give a presentation with some information, some question and answer sessions, but then they're also going to see how you interact with other candidates. So they can see if you're the leader or the follower or the person who takes over and does everything. Sometimes they'll put you in groups and have you do certain tasks just to see how you interact with each other. I've heard of some where as they go through the day, if you are not the type that they're looking for, you're not interacting like the candidate that they're looking for, that they'll start escorting people out. Thank you for your interest, but we're no longer interested. Thank you. Have a nice day. And then they kind of bring it down into a smaller group so that they have a more manageable group that they can do one-on-one interviews with. You could have a phone interview. Typically, phone interviews, you're not going to be hired after a phone interview. It's more of a screening interview. Sometimes it's a standard set of questions. You're talking to a person on the other end, and they're asking you those same questions that they're going to ask every single person they talk to on the phone. It could also be more of that automated call where it's press 1 if this is your answer, press 2 for this answer. And again, seeing if your answers match what they're looking for. If you have a phone interview, you want to make sure you're in a quiet area, a place where it's not distracting, the dog's not barking in the background, so you have a professional image or a professional area that will help you through that interview. This should be obvious, I hope, but you shouldn't be eating or drinking while you're on the phone. You don't want to be crunching popcorn in their ear as you're trying to make a professional appearance. And then the last one is a video conference. And with today's technology, there's a lot more of these going on. As much as possible before the interview is supposed to take place, make sure your computer's working, make sure it's charged, make sure the internet is working as best as you can. Obviously with technology, things go down last minute and there's nothing you can do about it. But as much as you can ahead of time, see that everything is good and in working order. Maybe do a practice interview with somebody, making sure everything is working right, microphones and everything. Background-wise, they're going to see what's in the background, so you want a business-like environment. You don't want them distracted by the posters or the pictures on the wall or whatever is behind you. You also don't want it to have people walking back and forth behind you. That, again, could be distracting. You do want to dress properly from head to toe. A lot of times plain colors are best, but you want to dress as if you were actually there. There was a commercial on a couple years ago where there was a guy doing a video conference online, and he was sitting on his couch with the computer in his lap, and I think he coughed or something and dropped the computer, and then all of a sudden everyone who was in the meeting could see that he had a dress shirt on, but he was wearing his boxers underneath. So you don't want anything to happen where you have to go get something or the computer falls or whatever, and they now know you're in pajamas or whatever you're in. Maintain eye contact with any interview, but for video conferencing interview, it's a little different because you're actually looking at the camera, whereas a lot of times it feels more natural to look at the person's face on the screen. It doesn't appear to them that you're making that eye contact. So those are the types of interviews, and we'll be looking at thinking about different answers to questions, and hopefully this helps as you prepare for future interviews.